One of the best things about climbing is that there are usually multiple ways to get through a sequence of moves. Depending on the profile of the climber, their strengths, preferences, and level of experience, each person can approach a problem using their own unique method. When we get on a climb for the first time, we usually default to the techniques we're most comfortable with. In the spur of the moment, we let instinct take over and play to our strengths. It's only when we revisit the climb that we have the opportunity to test out different movements, finding techniques that are more efficient and higher percentage. This video will explore 4 techniques applied to the same climb, analyzing the pros and cons of each, and ultimately pick out the one that is the best. The drop knee or back step utilizes both feet for your contact points and forms a stable base of support. The distinguishing characteristic of this technique is the turned in or dropped knee of the back leg, allowing the foot to pivot to its outside edge and thus turning in the hip. The main advantage of the drop knee is the maximization of your points of contact. Having 2 feet on footholds generally will alleviate more weight from the hands and allow you to allocate your energy better. The back step feature of the drop knee also helps to generate lateral pressure with the feet, creating an expansion effect that keeps you in the wall by pushing outwards. Lastly, the natural turning in of the hip moves your center of gravity closer to the wall and allows for a more controlled and static reach. All of this combines to make this technique a conservative and high percentage way to move. While an extra contact point with the second foot can offer more support, it also confines the body to a fixed place on the wall, meaning that your movement will be limited by the back foothold. This place on the wall that the climber has to fit in and move out of is referred to as the box. Being able to fit into the box depends greatly on the size of the climber. While the drop knee in the crux sequence is fine for me to execute, it's not possible for a climber who's shorter, since the back foothold would be too far for them to reach. Conversely, the box where I use the drop knee in the opening sequence might be too scrunched for someone who is taller than me. If we want the simplest, most conservative movement without worrying about fitting into a box, we'll use the outside flag. This is the most common way to climb if you opt for only using 1 foothold. The advantage of using the outside flag is that you'll always be moving from a position of opposite hand and foot, making this a stable technique that is very high percentage to execute. In the opening sequence, I outside flag with the left leg, moving off of the left hand and right foot to reach for the Waco with my right hand. I also outside flag at the crux sequence, again moving the right hand from a stable position of left hand and right foot. Because we are only utilizing 1 foothold, the second advantage of the outside flag is that it is accessible by almost any climber regardless of height. There's no real box to fit into because we only have 2 contact points. You'll notice that setting up an outside flag typically requires a foot swap to get into the position of opposite hand and foot. This can be no big deal most of the time, but if you're not confident with your foot swaps, it can present an issue. This foot swap is not only an extra technique that must be executed, it's also an extra move in your sequence. If you do a lot of outside flags, these extra moves can add up and cause more fatigue and opportunities to make a mistake. I'll be honest and say that I'm completely in love with the inside flag and will thus give a very biased opinion. The inside flag is done off of the same side hand and foot, just like the back flag, with the distinction of turning the hip in and flagging the leg on the inside of the other leg. The main advantage of the inside flag is that it requires no foot swaps. Unlike the outside flag, which needs the climber to switch to the foot opposite of their hand, the inside flag works off of the existing foot and maneuvers the body around it. Without this extra foot swap, the body saves energy by reducing the time under tension and thus getting into a flow a lot easier. And because this technique involves turning the hip in, it comes with all the benefits of an outside flag, allowing me to reach for holds in a static and controlled manner. The main disadvantage to the inside flag is that it is a slightly more advanced technique and trickier to execute. The degree to which you rotate your hip in can affect how comfortably you settle into the flag. Sometimes it's hard to find the sweet spot. I think a lot of this comes from using the outside flag as our default balance technique and just creating an overall unfamiliarity with other flagging techniques. The more I practice the inside flag, the more opportunities I find to use it. The back flag is the final technique we'll be reviewing. People usually discover this technique when they try to prevent their bodies from swinging from a barn door. The back flag is done off of the same side hand and foot, just like an inside flag, except the hips are kept square and the flagging leg goes behind the other leg. The back flag shares the same advantage as the inside flag in that it does not require any foot swaps. Couple that with the fact that the hips remain square throughout the movement means that this technique takes a very short time to set up, allowing the climber to transition quickly into and out of the technique. Overall, this means you spend less time under tension and preserve a bit more isometric energy. The trade-off for this advantage is that, generally speaking, transitioning out of a back flag becomes a dynamic movement. While dynamic can be more energy efficient than static in some scenarios, it also requires an element of timing and accuracy. Because my trajectory towards the hold is faster and less balanced, I have a much narrower margin of error for hitting the hold. This means the impact with which you hit a hold can range greatly from a soft impact, if your timing and accuracy is good, to a harsh impact or a complete miss if your timing and accuracy is poor. For this particular boulder problem, I'll rank the 4 techniques in the following order. This ranking is based off of variables like accessibility, percentage of execution, and fitness level required. This is the clear winner because it's the most simple, high percentage, and accessible technique. I can give this beta to anyone in the gym who is fit enough for this climb, and they will have a high chance of executing it. Although the foot swaps will cause this to take slightly longer than the other techniques, the additional energy spent is minor. The drop knee or back step comes next because it's the most energy efficient way to climb this problem, for me. Using both feet alleviates tension from the hands and makes the crux sequence way easier to execute. The only reason this technique comes in second is accessibility. You have to be a specific height in order to fit inside the box and reach both footholds. The inside flag is great, and this climb showcases the technique really well. However, the complexity of this move makes it something I wouldn't suggest to anyone who is unfamiliar with it, especially in a tough crux situation. And although I'm comfortable demonstrating and repeating this technique on this climb, if this was a free solo situation, I would definitely opt for a technique I'm a lot more comfortable with. While the back flag is probably the coolest looking of the 4 techniques, the timing element of its dynamic nature makes it the most difficult and low percentage to execute. This is most apparent in the crux sequence of the climb. There are scenarios where the back flag is ideal and preferable to other techniques, but for this particular boulder, it's the least reliable across the spectrum of climbers who are capable of climbing it. I want to take a moment and express my gratitude to Sacramento Pipeworks and Touchstone Climbing for being my home these last 6 years. You guys give me a place to grow as a person, athlete, and coach, and provided one of the best communities I've been around. I owe a lot to where I'm at and what I've accomplished to being part of your gym. I'm sure we'll meet again soon. Until next time, move better, climb harder.